During the webinar, all participants will be muted, but you will have the ability to unmute during the Q&A period. We, however, encourage you to put all your questions and comments in chat anytime during the webinar, and we will start with those questions first during the Q&A. We will end the formal part of this webinar at noon Mountain Time and stop the recording at that point. After that, anyone who wishes to stay to engage in a more informal conversation with our speaker is encouraged to do so. And now I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker for today, Dennis Longknife Jr. Dennis is an environmental specialist with over 27 years of experience in water quality, non-point source pollution, brownfields compliance, and wetlands management. He began his career as a wildland firefighter, serving 15 years across Montana, Idaho, and California, and later worked as a seasonal forester in western Montana's national forests. At Fort Belknap Environmental Protection Department, Dennis led the development of key initiatives, including the Aquatic Resource Protection Ordinance, the Noxious Weeds Strategic Plan, the Wetlands Work Plan, and the Climate Change Adaptation Plan for the Fort Belknap Indian community. His work earned him the EPA Region 8 Frank DeCoto Award. Dennis holds a bachelor's in environmental science with a forestry option from Salish and Kootenai College and is a certified U.S. Army Corps of Engineers wetland delineator. He has also established a regional herbarium cataloging over 240 native plant species and launched a comprehensive wetland and amphibian monitoring program on the Fort Belknap Indian Reservation. Dennis has also been one of the more frequent attendees of our webinars for past several years, so it's a real pleasure to welcome him as a speaker today. The title of today's webinar is From Adaptation Planning to Implementation in Aaniiih and Nakoda Nations, Challenges and Lessons Learned. Thank you, Dennis. Please take it away.
Hello, my friends, colleagues, and acquaintances. Like Aaniiih said, my name's Dennis Longknife Jr. I'm an Assiniboine from the ancestral homelands on the Fort Belknap Indian Reservation. Our tribes have always been in this area. I'm from the Bad Moccasin clan and the Bear clan. My great-grandfather's name was Longknife, so that's where all our relatives got their names from. That's a picture of him there on the right on that screen. You can see there with that large, I think that's an ostrich feather. He's standing behind a teepee there, and he's holding a large eagle feather wing fan there. On my dad's side of the family, we are all hunters and still practice our subsistence hunting and harvest big game, mostly deer, elk, antelope, and buffalo. On my mother's side, excuse me, as well as my father's side on our family, they were horsemen and owned horse ranches on the foothills of the Little Rocky Mountains. There are some nice quarter horses. Adaptation to implementation, challenges and lessons learned. Fort Belknap is home to two very distinct tribes, the Gros Ventre and the Assiniboine. However, we prefer to call ourselves the Aaniiih and Nakoda Nations. Aaniiih and Nakoda Nations. The Gros Ventre name was given by some French fur trappers when they first came around this region, and they noticed that the Gros Ventre, at the time, the Aaniiih, were using sign language, and the sign language for the waterfalls people is another term that they preferred to call themselves, the waterfalls people. So the sign language, they put their hand over their belly and then bring it out, and it looked like they were saying big bellies. So the French term for big belly is called gros ventre. So that's how they got their name that way, but that's not really our name, so it's Aaniiih. And in Assiniboine, we are part of the three sections of the Dakotas of the Sioux Nations. We're the Nakoda, Dakota, and Lakota. We are located 43 miles north or south of the Canadian border, right in north central Montana. Our reservation is over 700,000 acres, and we have around 8,000 enrolled members. The land is mostly rolling plains with the Milk River Valley as our northern boundary, as you can see in that picture there on the top. And then the central part, we have the prairies where our we have two different buffalo herds, and that's where they are in the grasslands and prairie there. And the southern part, the Little Rocky Mountains separates the southern boundary in that picture on the lower bottom. And that picture actually was taken before a fire we had about 4 years ago, which completely burnt that whole area over. But the last couple of years, you're getting some really good regrowth. Originally, we secured a BIA Tribal Climate Resiliency Grant in 2015, and then setbacks began immediately. For the first 2 years of the grant, I worked part-time because my supervisor at the time thought that there wasn't enough work tasks in the grant to have me working full-time. But in fact, I needed to work full-time to get this thing going. But anyway, after the first 2 years of the grant, my position finally changed to full-time. And that's when things really start taking off. In 2018, I developed a climate advisory committee made up of tribal program managers and various other tribal partners and community members. And at this time, we also hired a consultant to help us with the climate plan. They were the Center for Large Landscape Conservation based out of Bozeman, Montana. Beginning in 2018, we began to have a series of climate advisory meetings. And since some tribal programs wouldn't attend these meetings, at the advice of my consultants, we began going door to door because that's what they said worked before, and it proved to be the best way to collect information. We continued having 2 more meetings and a climate change training workshop through 2019. During this time, our plan was beginning to take shape, and you can see one of our meetings there. In attendance, there's some tribal councilmen, tribal program directors, the BIA forester, the one in the lower right-hand corner with the hat on, and our consultants there by that flip chart. Her name was Libby Kamalo, and she went through a few assistants during that time. And that's the picture of our climate adaptation plan, the front cover of it. The picture of Snake Butte is one of our most sacred sites on reservation, so I've used that for the picture on the cover of our new plan. Another couple of setbacks happened when our climate consultants had staff turnover twice, actually, which slowed down the process. The next setback was that we used up our funding. So our climate change program had to shut down temporarily. And finally, in the spring of 2021, after about a year off, our tribes were selected for another climate change funding again. So we continued where we left off and continued developing the plan, taking every obstacle that was handed to us, including the coronavirus, which slowed down our progress. Call it resiliency, I guess. This time, our consultants wanted to continue collecting more data and plan more meetings. However, I put a hold on that and requested that we finish finalizing what we already had. We had a pretty good plan already in draft form. And go for approval through the tribal council. And when we did this, they approved it unanimously. So on April 24th, 2023, our draft climate change and adaptation plan was finally officially approved. In the spring of 2023, we plan to install 2 weather stations. They're called Misanet weather stations, largely done by the Montana Climate Center out of Missoula. When it came time to install them, we ran into a roadblock. As the sites were not located on tribal trust lands, they were on, yes, and the BIA NEPA process would have to be followed, which is a lengthy, time-consuming process. So we then changed our locations to tribal trust lands, so we wouldn't have to go through all those hurdles. So now only the program EIS by the Corps of Engineers in unison with the cultural inventory by our Tribal Historic Preservation Office program. And then the environmental office is environmental assessments. We finally got the 2 Mesonet stations installed in August of 2024. During this time last year, I contacted, I was diagnosed with cancer, so I was laid up at home for several months last year, and I wasn't around when they got to install the 2 stations, but I got a hand in helping get him here to Fort Belknap. The Mesonet has soil probes that could record temperature, electrical conductivity, and has 3 or 4 levels of sensor depths. So you can collect different data for the 4 different depths in the soils. I think the first one's at 2 inches, the second one's at 4 or 8 inches, next one's at 20, and the other one's at 30. Anyway, they also collect atmospheric metrics such as temperature, relative humidity, rainfall, solar intensity, wind speed direction, barometric pressure, and lightning strikes. You can also program it to track vegetation health and forage production, and record changes in plant available water and soil water quality. And there's a picture there on the right of what they look like. They don't take up very much space. And another picture is showing the depths of the soil probes in the horizons. Control burning, control burns. In the springtime, our fire management department performed control burns in our communities to reduce wildfire threats in areas where brush may cause problems. Both the forestry program and the fire management department were already working together on strategies to protect our forest, such as thinning, prescribed burning, piling, and burning slash. So we began working together on a new project that we got funded with the help of another grant writer called the Little Rocky Forest Resilience Project. Due to mismanagement and lack of funding, the fire management program for our tribe was shut down and the BIA eventually took it over. So now we are lacking manpower and resources to respond to any wildfires we may have on our reservation. And this is very scary for our communities and natural resources. Thankfully, so far, we haven't had any catastrophic major wildfires. We've had a few range fires, but due to our volunteer fire department and other outside resources outside of the reservation, they respond very quickly and help us control our wildfires when they happen. These actions show just how our community is resilient. And more about the Little Rocky Forest Resilience Project. You can see the picture there on the upper right is our forester named Chet Gladstone, pointing across the valley there to where our project is located. Chet Gladstone is our BIA forester. He retired last fall, but yeah, the project is below a spiritual mountain called Eagle Child Peak, and it's a cultural site for some of our tribes when they're fasting. Chet explains that the Lurfer project main goal is to conduct thinning to improve forest health by removing trees, opening up the canopy to inhibit crown fires, removing deformed trees, and thinning slash by piling and burning. And finally, using prescribed fire to remove ground fields that promote wildfires. This benefits the forest by carbon cycling the forest floor litter that intercepts and limits precipitation from reaching the forest floor, thus enriching the soils that spur new native plant growth. In this picture, you can see on the upper right, there's one of our college students who now works full-time for our environmental office as a Brownsfield coordinator. He worked at the time at the Aaniiih Nakoda College, our tribal college, and he worked for us for a brief time, monitoring the soil moisture on the site, bringing back the cultural aspect of burning if needed. And I might want to mention that before Chet retired last fall, he wanted to proceed this year to start burning some of the piles left over, but due to the government shutdown now, and we haven't got to burn the piles yet. Hopefully we can get someone on board this fall or spring and get that done. The picture on the lower right is what the site looked like after it was thinned. You can see it opened up pretty much. And you can't really tell by these pictures, but there's hundreds and thousands of little tiny trees all laying on the ground there. And you can also see some native plant growth coming up through that already from the available sunlight and increased precipitation that's coming down to the forest floor now. Setbacks and challenges continue. In the beginning, we partnered with the BIA forester and worked with the Aaniiih Nakoda College and Center for Large Landscape Conservation. In the June of 2021, we began recruiting tribal members for a thinning crew, but we ran into delays because they lacked experience running chainsaws. And the available ones that did know how to run chainsaws went off the reservation or out of state to go on firefighting. So we waited all summer, and then finally in August, as the fire season winded down, some of our seasoned tribal members came back, and we had a chainsaw training so we could get more tribal members trained. So after fire season ended, we got a lot more manpower to help us in this endeavor to thin these trees. But we ran into another problem because we had a crew of 12, but we rarely had 12 on site. Most days we only had 3 to 7 thinners. So as the project dragged on through to September, we had very little progress and showed poor progress. Yeah, so at that time we had another meeting. We decided to go with a contract crew. So we opened up a thinning bid, and then a crew from, I can't remember, they're from Western Montana here somewhere. We hired them to do the remaining 70 acres of originally we had a 100-acre tract to thin. And like I said, all summer long, all we got done was 30 acres. So that was pretty poor. But in November, the contract crew finished up to 70 acres, and it only took them a couple of weeks to do this. And there's some pictures there of the site behind me there in that red hat. Behind us was the site we was at. The picture on the right is our saw boss, and the girl on the right of her name was Rebecca Waters. She took over the program as the project lead. And then the guy on the right is one of the college's natural resource instructor. That was his student that was using the soil probe, so he got to come on site and check things out. Then the two lower pictures of our tribal members sawing trees, thinning them out. One of the obstacles for the project was access to the project site. As you can see on this map, one of the landowners would not let our project go through his land, which would have been a short distance from that map. You could see where that red line begins at at the edge of the mountains. We would have only had to go along the side of the mountains to the left and to the side, but since we couldn't access his land, we had to go right through the mountains. And this took over 1.5 hours off our workday doing that. The road was bad in some areas and it took time. Forest resiliency in action. We monitor the project using drones and ground truthing. Drones give you an opportunity to see the progress of your work in real time, which once was a thick stand of trees is now a manageable forest stand, as you can see there in that picture. The Little Rocky Mountains are also called island mountains because they are surrounded by prairies. And we have a long history of wildfires here, with the last big wildfire in the 1930s that burned up over half of our forests. Now, with the last 70 years of suppression, we now have to manage our forests from catastrophic wildfire events when they occur. Within the last 10 years, we had 2 fires in our mountains, but luckily they didn't last very long and got to put them out. Actually, the last fire we had up there, I didn't show any pictures of this. It's on a different slide and presentation I have, but in the past, when I was young and worked thinning trees, actually one of these thinned units slowed the fire down. So it shows that thinning trees does help keep from having catastrophic wildfire events. Native First Foods. This is another project that I'm involved in. Many of our tribal members continue their cultural practices of collecting and harvesting native plants such as peppermint, juneberry, chokecherries, turnip, and sage. One of our plans identified in our climate change adaptation plan has now been implemented from this project and is now called the Climate Adaptation Science Center's First Foods Project. We got this by working with the University of Montana's environmental forestry science professors. Her name was Jen. I can't remember her last name off the hand, but it included a feasibility study to assess restoring subalpine fir. Remember I told you earlier that we had a catastrophic fire in the 1930s. It wiped out any remaining stands of subalpine fir that we had at that time. So getting this back will would be a big stepping stone for our tribe. This assessment, the feasibility study, will direct our plans for eventually developing a project where we can use, restore, revegetate, and protect our native plant species. We're already moving into the identification of our tribe's priority species list and what we'll use on our future projects. Subalpine fir is of high ceremonial value to our tribes, and now we have to travel many miles to get it from neighboring tribes. Part of the feasibility study will be used to identify sites for reintroduction, which we are doing now. And to show how resilient we are, we plan to implement project plans to start up a tribal garden and nursery and use local seed stock to eventually vegetate this species back into our mountains. And this is also happening right now. We don't got a tribal garden and nursery, but we got a greenhouse put in, and we're looking for seed stock right now so we can start this process of revegetating some sites with subalpine fir, hopefully next year. That'll be a great triumph for our tribe if we could get that done. Here's some pictures of what I was talking about, subalpine fir, some peppermint, some sage, and a wild turnip on the lower right. This is some more pictures of the First Foods project. The student on the right is one of my climate education outreach assistants. His name's Austin After Buffalo. And he's with another lady there. She's from the college. She was an intern who is now a tribal college instructor herself now. But anyway, at the time, they were doing plant transects and measuring the health integrity of some of these sites. There was 10 sites selected for transects up in our Little Rocky Mountains. And then they also collected some native plants, and you could see him here. I was teaching him how to press and mount some plant species, which we are, by the way. I'm gonna take all our plants we collected and pressed and mounted up here to the University of Montana's botany to have them quality assurance to make sure that we identify them correctly, and also to give them copies, extra specimens of our plants to put in their herbarium as well as our own. And the picture on the lower picture there, the lady on her left is Lorena Brocky. She's the one that's helping with the subalpine fir project. She's acquired a greenhouse and is working to get seed stock to start growing some so we could transplant them. The lady next to her is the guy on the right's wife, Buster and Don Bishop. Buster Moore and Don. Buster is one of our tribe's spiritual elders. And that's me in the middle. And the tall, skinny guy there on the right is Dave Sauchin. He's the director of the Prairie Research Adaptation Center in Canada. And he's done several climate studies on island mountains in our area. So it's good to have that guy on our team. The lady next to him is Jen Thompson. That's her last name. She's from the University of Montana here. She runs the forestry, one of the forestry studies programs. She's the one that helped us secure the grant for this whole project. And the guy next to her is Austin After Buffalo, my assistant, and Shelby Main. Oh, sorry, I got those two ladies mixed up. Jennifer Thompson is the one on the end. Shelby Main is one of our environmental non-point source coordinators. She is in between those two guys. But anyway, yeah. We continue working with our elders so they can share their knowledge through storytelling with our children and our tribal communities. And we capture some of that knowledge with elder interviews and elder questionnaires, which in turn strengthens our climate change adaptation plan. When our community loses an elder, it's such a huge loss as their knowledge goes with them. So continued prayers for the ones we have. At the time I developed this presentation, the lady there on the upper right was with us, but now she has crossed over to the other side. And the other gentleman on the right is my uncle, and he's a former tribal councilman, Donovan Archambault. And in the lower picture there is some of our students at one of the our tribal colleges outreach events. Wrapping up, we want to develop new partnerships and collaborate on climate projects, including native plant restoration, maybe get some more help with our plans, and continue community meetings and perform education and outreach. And also help our community to be better prepared for extreme weather events and to become more resilient. And we want to continue working with our Aaniiih and Nakoda College and other universities on climate projects. And most importantly, stay resilient. This is a picture from the north looking south on our reservation showing our beautiful prairie and the Little Rocky Mountains in the back. I would like to thank our project partners who have supported us in so many ways. the Fort Belknap Indian Community Tribal Programs, the BIA Tribal Resiliency Program, the Center for Large Landscape Conservation, the Wildlife Conservation Society for their grants, Aaniiih Nakoda College for inviting me to share my work with the students and their support, and the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation's grants. Panamia means thank you in Assiniboine, so that's most of my presentation.
Thank you so much. I was just
You're welcome.
It's great to see those slides. I'm glad it all worked out with the presentation. We had a little hiccup with government shutdown earlier, so I'm really delighted that this was
Yeah, I
presented.
got laid off, but I'm doing this anyway and showing you how resilient I am. I'm doing my
Yes.
presentation from a hotel conference room in Missoula because I got to give an in-person presentation at the university to some students there later this afternoon.
Thanks for your resilience, Dennis. Once again, we have a lot of time for Q&A. We have one question that came in chat, and then we just open up to everybody else. At this point, yeah, you should be able to unmute and share your videos. So please feel free to share your videos as we are a small group. Don't be shy. So Dennis, one question that came in the chat, I'll just repeat it here. It's about the forests on your land. Are these forests native to the area, or are they the result of woody encroachment due to human planting or climate change?
I didn't hear you too well.
Okay, I'll repeat it. It's about the forests on your land. Are they native to your land, or are they the result of human planting of invasive species and or climate change?
They're pretty much native forest and plant community there. We do got encroachment by some invasive plants that we need to address. As you said earlier to the group, I developed a noxious weed strategic plan. So currently right now, our tribal land department hired a consultant and I'm working with them to update the plan to get a new one going and hopefully start a invasive species program in Fort Belknap here.
It was a really great photo of the drone footage showing after the treatment.
Yeah, that was one of our science instructors at the Hayes Lodgepole High School, which is a mountain community. He had a drone, so he volunteered for a couple of days to fly it around for us at our project sites. He's since retired, but we're gonna miss him. He's still around. He's a native of the Harlem, Fort Belknap area, so hopefully we'll get to use his drone again when he comes to visit.
Great. Oh, that's a great example of showing effects of your work. We have a couple more questions that came in the chat. I'll get to the next question. Thank you so much for sharing challenges you face when working on adaptation planning and implementation. Do you have suggestions for how to anticipate these kind of challenges or advice on how to respond to them when they arise?
Yeah, it's kind of like a work in progress. We're continuing to meet new challenges, and funding is a big thing. And also these government shutdowns, you can't really plan for these, I guess. My work with the tribe and other organizations is going to be challenging these next, as long as the government shutdown is going on. But I'll continue to volunteer my time, I guess, when I can to help our tribe.
Christy, do you have a follow-up on that?
Excuse me?
Oh, I just asking Christy. She had that question if she wanted to follow up on that question.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dennis. Yeah, I guess I just wondered, there are so many things that are uncertain with the government shutdown and things that come up, and just wondered if, from your experience dealing with these challenges, if you had any sort of advice for how, sort of personally, how do you go about addressing them, or yeah, just wondered if you had any specific advice for the rest of us, because I think we all run into these sort of challenges with capacity or funding or things being
Sure.
disrupted.
Just like
And
in my last slide where I acknowledged everybody that had a hand in our plan, don't just keep yourself uh just don't keep yourself on one major project. Like I did, I got my hand into several projects, and that works good because if one thing doesn't work, you can always fall back on another. And even with this BIA funding, when the Trump in office, we don't even know if we're going to get funded next year for some more BIA tribal resiliency grants. So it's good to have these side projects to continue the work in climate change. So I'd say just keep your options open, do a lot of research, work with your partners, universities to help find you more funding. They're really great to work with, and they got some great grant writers.
thank you.
We have one more question on the chat. Asmal, would you like to ask that question yourself?
Sure. Hi, Dennis. Thank you so much for such a well-organized presentation. So I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Sociology at Colorado State University, and also working with Great Plains Tribal Water Alliance for my PhD dissertation projects. So it seems like you have been co-producing climate change adaptation knowledge in various projects and various capacities with the Western scientists and practitioners. Uh, like, would you please walk through like what is your overall experience when you are co-producing climate change adaptation knowledge, collaborating with the scientists and practitioners trained in Western academia or Western organizations? And also, how do you, or what is your overall stand on tribal data sovereignty when you co-produce with scientists and practitioners?
Well, our climate plan is a living document, meaning that we can always update it as needed, and we're ready to move to the next level. Maybe with the new BIA climate funding, we want to incorporate more traditional ecological knowledge into this plan, make it more powerful and more of our own plan. Yeah, so it's basically a good starting point for us, and it outlines what our tribes are already doing to make ourselves resilient. We're not starting from the beginning. We're already working on things that our tribal programs are already doing, and I just outlined them in my plan and went with the new meetings to get more ideas. I don't know if I answered your question there, but
What about like data sovereignty? Like, do you have any principles or any uh, strategy to ensure tribal data sovereignty when you work with non-tribal scientists, climate scientists, or practitioners? Does it
we're
does
still
it make
working with people like that. We have a tribal emergency response program. It's called our DES, Disaster Emergency Services Coordinator. And we work with her, and she works with her project partners to bring help to Fort Belknap anytime we have any extreme weather events. We've had floods. We just got off a severe exceptional drought a couple years ago. And we're already moving into the category D2, which means that we're moving into from severe drought situations here in Fort Belknap again, which is going to hurt our farmers and ranchers and our wildlife. So we all came together the last time we had one and drilled new wells, created more water capture systems out on the land.
Dennis, Osmond's questions was about data, tribal data, and sensitive tribal data. How do you deal with that? And how do you share that more widely?
We work with our tribal council and our environmental director. We try to keep our data to ourselves. We don't try to share too much, especially if it's vegetation and data.
Other questions? And please feel free to unmute and ask your question. And
I have a quick question. So, you know, we were in this presentation a couple days ago, and folks were talking about sort of this like valley of death between sort of like research and then like applications for the research, or kind of like making it useful and usable, and you know, making great ideas really get traction on the ground. And I was thinking, it a lot of times we hear about
Heather,
something.
could I take a quick break? I gotta use the restroom.
Oh, of course.
I don't know how to take myself off audio or anything, but I'll be back in a few minutes.
Audio. I guess we have 10 more minutes of formal time. I'll just stop the recording at this point.